It's the morning of June 28, 1914, and 19-year-old Gavrilo Princip is standing on a street corner in Sarajevo, having what is genuinely the worst day of his life. His team had just botched the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. The bomb missed. His co-conspirators were being arrested. The whole operation was a disaster. Dejected and convinced he had failed history, he walked into a nearby deli to get something to eat. He had no idea that the most consequential 30 seconds in modern history were about to happen entirely by accident. To understand how a teenager with a sandwich managed to accidentally start the deadliest war the world had ever seen, we need to go back about 30 years. And we need to talk about a map. See, in the mid-1800s, the Balkans, the cluster of small nations sitting at the bottom of Europe, were a geopolitical nightmare. For centuries, the region had been carved up and controlled by two enormous empires. To the east, the Ottoman Empire. To the northwest, the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And squeezed between them, like a man sitting in the middle seat on a very long flight, was the small Slavic nation of Serbia. Serbia had a complicated relationship with both of its enormous neighbors. The Ottomans had ruled over Serbian territory for nearly 500 years, and the Austro-Hungarian Empire wasn't much better. They treated the Slavic peoples of the Balkans as second-class subjects in their own homeland. By the early 1900s, Serbian nationalism was burning white-hot. A growing movement of young Slavs had one dream and one dream only: a unified South Slavic state free from foreign domination that they called Yugoslavia. Now into this powder keg of nationalist fury walks a teenage boy from a small Bosnian village named Gavrilo Princip. Princip was born in 1894 in the village of Obiljež in Bosnia, which at the time was under Austro-Hungarian control. He was the second of 9 children born to a postman father who struggled to keep the family fed. 6 of those 9 children died in infancy. Gavrilo himself was so sickly as a baby that his mother initially refused to name him, assuming he wouldn't survive. A local priest stepped in and named him Gavrilo after the Archangel Gabriel, as a kind of prayer that the boy might live. He lived. As a teenager, Princip moved to Sarajevo to study, and the city crackled with revolutionary energy. Everywhere he went, young men were talking about Slavic liberation, about overthrowing Austro-Hungarian rule, about dying for the cause if necessary. For a poor, sickly kid from a village nobody had ever heard of, this was intoxicating stuff. By 1912, at just 18 years old, Princip had already been expelled from school for participating in anti-Austrian demonstrations. He traveled to Belgrade to volunteer for the Serbian military and was turned away for being too small and too thin. The recruiters took one look at him and sent him home. And this is where the story gets interesting, because a lesser man would have gone home, accepted his limitations, and lived out a quiet, unremarkable life. But Princip was not a lesser man. He was, by all accounts, absolutely consumed by the cause. He read voraciously, he memorized revolutionary poetry, he idolized Serbian nationalist heroes, and sometime in 1913, he fell in with a secret society that would change the course of human history. The organization was called Ujedinjenje ili Smrt Union, or Death. But most people knew it by its other name, the Black Hand. The Black Hand was a secret Serbian nationalist organization founded in 1911 with one stated goal: the unification of all South Slavic peoples by any means necessary, including assassination. The group was led by a Serbian military intelligence colonel named Dragutin Dimitrijević, who went by the nickname Apis, meaning the bull, because of his enormous physical presence. Apis was brilliant, ruthless, and completely convinced that political violence was not just acceptable but necessary. He was exactly the kind of man that a passionate, angry, idealistic teenager like Princip would idolize completely. And Apis saw in Princip exactly the kind of true believer he needed. By early 1914, the Black Hand had identified their target. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, was scheduled to make an official visit to Sarajevo on June 28, 1914. June 28th was not a random date. It was Vidovdan St. Vitus Day, the anniversary of the Battle of Kosovo in 1389, arguably the most sacred date in Serbian national memory. The day the Ottomans had crushed the Serbian medieval kingdom. Scheduling a royal visit by the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne on that specific day was, to Slavic nationalists, an act of deliberate provocation. It was the equivalent of scheduling a victory parade through the most painful wound in the national psyche. The Black Hand decided Franz Ferdinand would not make it home. Apis assembled a team of 6 young assassins. Gavrilo Princip was one of them. The others were Nedeljko Čebrinović, Mohamed Mehmed Basić, Vaso Čubrilović, Cvjetko Popović, and Danilo Ilić. Their average age was 20 years old. Most of them had tuberculosis. None of them had ever killed anyone. Apis equipped each man with a .32 caliber FN Model 1910 semi-automatic pistol and a small grenade. He also gave each of them a cyanide capsule, with explicit instructions that if captured, they were to kill themselves immediately to prevent the conspiracy from being traced back to Serbia. They were trained for approximately 2 weeks. These 6 young men, some of them teenagers, some of them dying of tuberculosis, armed with pistols and hand grenades they barely knew how to use, were going to assassinate the heir to one of the most powerful empires in Europe. What could possibly go wrong? The plan itself was actually not terrible, which makes what happened next even more painful to describe. The assassins were positioned along the Apel Quay, the main road Franz Ferdinand's motorcade would travel through Sarajevo on its way to City Hall. Each man was spaced out along the route, giving multiple opportunities for one of them to succeed if the others failed. It was a layered kill zone. On paper, this was a professionally designed ambush. In reality, it was about to become the most catastrophically incompetent assassination attempt in recorded history. It's June 28, 1914. The motorcade carrying Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie departs at approximately 10 a.m. The Archduke is sitting in the back of an open-top Graf und Stift touring car wearing his sky blue military uniform adorned with gold decorations, a ceremonial helmet topped with green peacock feathers. His wife Sophie sits beside him wearing a white dress and a large hat. They are visible to everyone on the street. Franz Ferdinand waves at the crowd. The motorcade passes the first assassin, Mehmed Basić, who does absolutely nothing. He later claims a policeman was standing nearby and he didn't want to risk it. The motorcade continues. It passes the second assassin, Vaso Čubrilović, who also does nothing. He later admits he simply lost his nerve entirely. The motorcade passes the third assassin, Čebrinović, who actually does something. Čebrinović steps forward, bangs the grenade against a lamppost to activate the fuse, and throws it directly at the Archduke's car. The driver, spotting the object in the air, hits the accelerator. The grenade bounces off the folded convertible roof of the car and rolls underneath the following vehicle in the motorcade. It explodes. 2 of the Archduke's aides are injured. Several bystanders are wounded. Franz Ferdinand is completely unharmed. The motorcade speeds away towards City Hall. Čebrinović, panicking, swallows his cyanide capsule and jumps into the nearby Miljacka River to escape. The cyanide makes him violently ill but doesn't kill him, because it was old and had degraded. The Miljacka River, in late June, is approximately 4 inches deep. He is immediately pulled out of the water, beaten by the crowd, and arrested by police. The remaining assassins, Princip, Popović, Ilić, and Čubrilović, scatter. The plan had failed. The operation was over. People were being arrested. Within the hour, every single one of the remaining assassins had given up and dispersed into the city. Princip, dejected and overwhelmed, walked to a nearby delicatessen on Franz Joseph Street called Schiller's Deli. He went inside, he ordered something to eat, and for a few minutes he stood there on the street outside the deli, eating his food, watching the city move around him, trying to process the fact that his one great purpose had collapsed into an embarrassing, bloody shambles. He had failed. Except he hadn't. See, here is where fate, in a moment of almost incomprehensible historical irony, decided to intervene. After the bombing, Archduke Franz Ferdinand had continued to City Hall and delivered his scheduled speech, because Franz Ferdinand was, whatever else you might say about him, an exceptionally brave man. But after the speech, he made a decision. He wanted to visit the aides who had been wounded in the grenade attack at the hospital. A change of route was arranged. The motorcade would need to take a different path through the city. The problem was that nobody told the lead driver. The lead driver followed the original route. And it was only when the governor of Bosnia, who was riding in the car with the Archduke, suddenly shouted that this was the wrong way that the driver realized his mistake. He hit the brakes, directly in front of Schiller's Deli. He began to reverse to correct the route. The car stalled. Gavrilo Princip looked up from his sandwich. Standing less than 5 feet away from him, in a stalled, open-top car, was Archduke Franz Ferdinand. heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, the man he had spent months preparing to kill, the man whose assassination had failed completely just an hour earlier. He was right there, not moving, 5 feet away. Princip did not hesitate. He stepped forward, drew his FN Model 1910 pistol, and fired twice. The first bullet struck Franz Ferdinand in the jugular vein, the second struck Sophie in the abdomen. The car sped away toward the governor's residence. Franz Ferdinand, blood pouring from his neck, kept repeating the words, so Ferrell, don't die, live for our children." Sophie was already losing consciousness. She slumped against her husband and died before the car reached the building. Franz Ferdinand died approximately an hour later. Princip was immediately seized by the crowd. He tried to swallow his cyanide capsule but was stopped. He fired his pistol at his own head, but the gun was wrestled away before the shot could land. He was arrested, beaten, and taken into custody. He was 19 years old, and he had just accidentally started World War I. Now, here is where the story shifts from being the tale of one failed teenager to being the story of how the entire world lost its mind in approximately 6 weeks. See, Franz Ferdinand's assassination was a crisis, but it didn't have to be a war. Assassinations of political figures had happened before without triggering global conflicts. What turned this particular murder into the deadliest war in human history up to that point was a system that Europe had spent 30 years building and that nobody had fully thought through. It was called the alliance system, and it worked like a geopolitical version of a bar fight where everyone agreed in advance to jump in if their friend got hit. Here is how it worked. Germany and Austria-Hungary were allied in a pact called the Dual Alliance, signed in 1879. If either nation was attacked, the other was obligated to join the fight. Russia had a competing alliance with France, signed in 1894. If either was attacked, the other would mobilize. Britain had a separate agreement with France called the Entente Cordiale, and had also guaranteed the neutrality of Belgium under a treaty signed in 1839. Beneath all of these major alliances were dozens of smaller agreements, military understandings, and mutual obligations that stretched across the continent like a web of tripwires. All of this had been constructed over 3 decades as a deterrence mechanism. The logic was simple. If every nation knew that attacking one country meant fighting all of its allies, nobody would attack anyone. It was supposed to make war impossible. In June of 1914, it made war inevitable. Austria-Hungary, furious at the assassination of its heir, sent Serbia an ultimatum so deliberately humiliating and so impossible to fully accept that it was essentially designed to be rejected. Serbia accepted most of the demands, almost every single point, but pushed back on 2 conditions that would have effectively surrendered its sovereignty entirely. For Austria-Hungary, this was enough. On July 28th, exactly 1 month after the assassination, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. Russia, bound by its alliance obligations and fiercely protective of its Slavic neighbors, began mobilizing its enormous army. Germany, watching Russia mobilize, declared war on Russia on August 1st. France, allied with Russia, was next. Germany declared war on France on August 3rd. And because Germany's plan for fighting a 2-front war involved invading France through Belgium, German troops crossed the Belgian border on August 4th. Britain, having guaranteed Belgian neutrality since 1839, declared war on Germany that same day. 6 weeks, 1 stalled car, 5 feet of pavement, 2 pistol shots. 20 million people would be dead before it was over. The war that followed consumed an entire generation. Trenches stretched from the English Channel to the Swiss border. Men lived like animals in mud and rats and poison gas for 4 years. The Ottoman Empire collapsed. The Russian Tsar was overthrown and executed with his entire family. The Austro-Hungarian Empire, the very empire Princip had despised, the empire whose heir he had killed, ceased to exist entirely. Germany was crushed, humiliated, and saddled with war reparations so severe that they helped create the economic desperation that would eventually bring a certain Austrian painter to power 2 decades later. Gavrilo Princip did not live to see most of it. Because he was 19 when he committed the assassination, he was below the Austro-Hungarian age threshold for the death penalty. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison and confined in the Theresienstadt fortress in Bohemia. Prison conditions were brutal. He was kept in solitary confinement for long periods. His tuberculosis, the disease that had plagued him most of his life, worsened severely in the damp stone cells. His right arm became so infected from the disease that it was amputated. He died on April 28, 1918. He was 23 years old. The war he had started was still being fought. He never saw its end. He weighed approximately 40 kilograms when he died. In his final months, a prison psychiatrist named Martin Pappenheim visited Princip and asked him if he regretted what he had done. Princip's answer was this: "I am not a criminal because I destroyed that which was evil. I think that I did a good deed." Whether Princip was a terrorist or a freedom fighter, a murderer or a martyr, has been debated ever since. Serbia has a street named after him. Austria considers him a symbol of political violence. Bosnia is divided depending on which community you ask. He is either a hero or a monster. What nobody debates is the scale of the consequences. One teenager, one failed operation, one stalled car, one deli on Franz Josef Street, 100 million dead if you count the Second World War that grew directly from the ashes of the First. All because the lead driver took a wrong turn. So that's the story, and hopefully you walked away with something new today. If you enjoyed this, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. It genuinely helps the channel grow, and I've got a lot more stories like this one coming. Drop a comment and let me know what you think, or what topic you want covered next. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.